The suitcase sat by our front door like a guilty conscience, all polished leather and brass corners that caught the morning light streaming through our bay window. Maren had packed it with the same precision she brought to everything else in her life, folded corners sharp enough to cut glass, every item in its designated pocket. "Another conference?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen doorway with my coffee mug. The ceramic felt warm against my palms, a small comfort in what was becoming a familiar routine. "Vartan Corp's quarterly strategy summit," she replied without looking up from her phone. Her manicured fingers danced across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Anton wants the senior team there for the full 3 days." Anton Vartan. Her boss, her mentor, her golden ticket to the executive suite. I'd heard his name more times in the past 6 months than my own. "That's the 7th conference this year," I said, keeping my voice level. As a structural engineer, I'd learned to spot weaknesses in foundations. This conversation felt like standing on cracking concrete. Maren finally glanced up, her smile as perfectly constructed as everything else about her appearance. "Success requires commitment, Jace. You know that." She crossed the room and kissed my cheek, her perfume, something expensive I didn't recognize, lingering in the air. "I'll call you tonight from the hotel." The Palisade Grand, no doubt. Always the Palisade Grand. I watched her wheel the suitcase toward her BMW, noting the small luggage tag she thought I hadn't seen, the one with our home address crossed out and replaced with something else entirely, the one she'd hidden behind the airline tags from conferences that, according to my research, didn't exist. My phone buzzed as her taillights disappeared around the corner. The tracking app I'd installed during one of her careless moments showed her location as a small blue dot heading toward downtown. Not toward the airport, not toward any conference center, toward the Palisade Grand Hotel. I poured another coffee and settled into my home office, surrounded by blueprints and structural calculations that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the architecture of lies my wife had been constructing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days ensuring buildings wouldn't collapse, while my marriage crumbled around me. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:30. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I recognized but had never spoken to directly. Elara Vartan stood on my doorstep like an elegant storm cloud, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. In her hands, she held a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Mrs. Vartan," I said, opening the door. "This is unexpected." "May I come in, Mr. Arnell?" Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from boardrooms and country clubs. "I believe we have something to discuss." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. She moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, her heels clicking against our hardwood floors like a countdown timer. "Coffee?" I offered. "No, thank you." She settled into our leather armchair, the expensive one Maren had insisted we needed to project success, and placed the folder on the glass coffee table between us. "I assume you're wondering why I'm here?" The thought had crossed my mind. Elara's smile held all the warmth of a January morning in Maine. "Your wife is having an affair with my husband." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I'd suspected, of course. The late nights, the mysterious conferences, the way she'd started password protecting her phone, but hearing it stated so matter-of-factly by the wronged wife of her lover felt like being hit with a sledgehammer wrapped in silk. "I see," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Do you?" She opened the folder and withdrew a photograph. "This was taken last Tuesday at the Palisade Grand, room 1247. The image showed Maren and Anton Vartan in what could generously be called a compromising position. She wore the red dress I'd complimented her on that morning, the one she'd claimed was for a client dinner. He wore significantly less. "There are more," Elara continued, her tone as clinical as a pathologist's report. 17 photographs, to be precise. Credit card receipts from restaurants, hotels, and jewelry stores. Text messages recovered from Anton's laptop backup. Phone records showing calls at all hours. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I studied the photograph, noting details with the same analytical mind I applied to structural problems. The champagne bottle on the nightstand, the Vartan Corp expense account receipt visible on the dresser, the way Maren's wedding ring sat on the nightstand like a discarded afterthought. "Why bring this to me?" I asked. "Why not confront your husband directly?" Elara's laugh could have frosted windows. "Oh, I intend to confront him, but Anton responds only to public humiliation and financial pressure. Your wife, I suspect, responds to having her carefully constructed world demolished brick by brick." She reached into the folder again and produced a second photograph. This one showed Maren and Anton in our kitchen, taken through the window. The timestamp indicated last Thursday, when I'd been at a job site in Portland. She brought him here, I said, more to myself than to Elara. Into your home, into your bed. She photographed herself there and sent the images to my husband as some sort of trophy. Elara's composure cracked just enough to reveal the fury beneath. She thinks she's won something. I set the photograph down carefully, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. What do you propose we do about it? We destroy them both. The words came out with the precision of a surgical blade. Professionally, socially, and financially, we make them understand that actions have consequences. I'm listening. Elara leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of intelligence that had probably terrified boardrooms for decades. Anton is at the Palisade Grand right now, in the penthouse suite, charging everything to the company account. Your wife is with him, playing the role of devoted employee at a conference that doesn't exist. She pulled out a tablet and showed me Vartencorp's internal calendar system. I have administrative access to all company systems, including hotel security protocols and expense account monitoring. I can create a compliance audit alert that will bring corporate security directly to their door. And my role in this? You're the concerned husband who discovered irregularities in your wife's travel patterns. You arrive at the hotel seeking answers just as the audit team arrives. Pure coincidence, of course. I studied her face, looking for the catch. In my experience, plans that seemed too good to be true usually were. What's to stop them from claiming it was legitimate business? Elara's smile returned, colder than before. The fact that there is no quarterly strategy summit. The fact that Anton charged a $2,000 bottle of champagne to the marketing budget. The fact that your wife has been submitting fraudulent expense reports for months. She handed me a USB drive. Everything's on here. Financial records, photographs, communications. Enough evidence to end both their careers and provide you with significant advantages in divorce proceedings. I turned the drive over in my hands, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to hold so much destructive power. Why me? Why not handle this yourself? Because Anton expects me to be the scorned wife, crying into my pillow. He doesn't expect me to have allies, and he certainly doesn't expect the husband he's been cuckolding to have any backbone. The word hit like a physical blow, but she was right. I'd been passive, accepting, willfully blind to what was happening under my own roof. The old Jace would have confronted Maren privately, given her a chance to explain, maybe even forgiven her. But the old Jace hadn't seen photographs of his wife in his own bed with another man. When do we do this? I asked. Today? Now. They're expecting to have the entire afternoon together, undisturbed. Elara stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced efficiency. I'll trigger the compliance audit in exactly 1 hour. That gives you time to reach the hotel and position yourself. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Arnell. Once we start this, there's no going back. Your marriage will be over. Your wife's career will be finished. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the suitcase by the door, packed with lies, about the conference that didn't exist, about the photographs of my own bedroom being used as props in someone else's affair. My marriage was over the moment she brought him into our home, I said. I'm just making it official. Elara nodded approvingly. Then let's give them a conference they'll never forget. After she left, I sat in the sudden silence of my house, surrounded by the artifacts of a life that had been built on increasingly shaky ground. The family photos on the mantel, the vacation souvenirs from trips that now seemed like elaborate performances, the wedding picture where Maren's smile looked genuine and my own face radiated the kind of happiness that seemed impossible now. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the tracking app one more time. The blue dot hadn't moved from the Palisade Grand. Room 1247, according to Elara's intelligence, time to crash their party. The Palisade Grand Hotel rose from downtown Portland's business district like a glass and steel monument to excess. I'd driven past it countless times, never imagining I'd be entering as anything other than a tourist or wedding guest. Now I stood in the marble-floored lobby, surrounded by the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. My phone showed 11:45, 15 minutes until Elara triggered whatever corporate nightmare she had planned for the penthouse suite. Can I help you, sir? The concierge approached with the practiced smile of someone paid to solve problems discreetly. I'm looking for my wife, I said, letting a note of concern creep into my voice. Maren Arnell. She's here for a Vartencorp conference, but I can't seem to reach her. The young man's fingers danced across his keyboard with professional efficiency. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't show any Vartencorp events scheduled for today. Perfect. Elara's information was solid. That's strange, I said, frowning. She specifically mentioned the quarterly strategy summit. Could you check under Anton Vartan? He's the CEO. More keyboard clicking. The concierge's expression shifted slightly, the kind of subtle change that suggested he'd found something interesting. Mr. Vartan is registered in our penthouse suite, but it's listed as personal accommodation, not corporate. Personal? I let my voice rise just enough to attract attention from other guests in the lobby. But she said it was business. She said the whole senior team would be here. The concierge glanced around nervously. Sir, perhaps we could discuss this more privately? No, I think we're fine right here. I pulled out my phone and made a show of checking it. She's not answering her calls, her assistant doesn't know where she is, and now you're telling me her boss is here on personal business? A small cluster of onlookers had gathered, the sort of scene upscale hotels hoped never to see, since nothing disrupted their quiet sophistication more than an argument unfolding in the lobby. Mr. Arnell, a new voice said behind me. I turned to see a security guard approaching, his uniform crisp and his expression professionally neutral. I'm Tom Bradley, hotel security. Perhaps I could help you locate your wife. That would be wonderful, I said, loud enough for the growing audience to hear, because according to your records, she's here with her boss on what she told me was a business conference, but what you're calling personal accommodation. Bradley's radio crackled to life. Security to penthouse level. Compliance audit in progress. The timing was perfect. Elara had triggered her corporate audit exactly on schedule. Sir, Bradley said, his attention now divided between me and his radio, I'm going to have to ask you to wait here while we... Wait for what? I demanded. My wife lied to me about where she was going and why. Her boss is charging personal expenses to his company account, and now there's some kind of audit happening upstairs? The elevator chimed, and 3 people in dark suits emerged, moving with the purposeful stride of corporate investigators. They carried briefcases and wore the kind of expressions that suggested someone's day was about to get much worse. Vartan Corp compliance team, one of them announced to Bradley. We need immediate access to the penthouse suite. This is about my wife, isn't it? I said, stepping forward. Maren Arnell. She's up there with Anton Vartan. The lead investigator, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes to match, studied me with professional interest. And you are? Her husband, the one she lied to about being here. She exchanged glances with her colleagues, the kind of wordless communication that suggested they'd dealt with similar situations before. Mr. Arnell, I'm going to have to ask you to remain in the lobby while we conduct our investigation. Investigation into what? Expense account irregularities and potential policy violations. The elevator chimed again, and this time Elara Vartan emerged, dressed in a different outfit than she'd worn to my house, a navy business suit that screamed corporate authority. She moved across the lobby like she owned it, which, given the Vartan family's wealth, she probably could have. Mrs. Vartan, the lead investigator said, clearly recognizing her. I wasn't expecting you here. When my husband's expense report started showing irregularities, I felt I should be present for the audit, Elara replied smoothly. Her eyes met mine briefly, a flash of shared conspiracy. I believe Mr. Arnell here has similar concerns about his wife's activities. The pieces were falling into place with mechanical precision. The compliance team had their corporate violations. I had my cheating wife. Elara had her public humiliation scenario. And somewhere upstairs, Maren and Anton were about to discover that their carefully constructed afternoon of deception was about to become very public. I'm going up there, I announced, moving toward the elevator. Sir, I can't allow that, Bradley said, stepping into my path. You can't stop me from checking on my wife's welfare, I replied, pulling out my phone. Especially when she's apparently involved in some kind of corporate investigation. The compliance team leader held up a hand. Actually, Mr. Arnell, your presence might be helpful. If there are personal relationships affecting business decisions, we need to document that. Elara nodded approvingly. Transparency is always the best policy in these situations. The elevator ride to the penthouse level felt like ascending toward a reckoning. The compliance team reviewed their files in whispered conversations. Bradley spoke quietly into his radio, coordinating with hotel management. Elara stood beside me, her composure absolute, but I could sense the anticipation radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Are you ready for this? She asked quietly. I've been ready since I saw the photographs, I replied. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway lined with expensive artwork and thick carpeting that muffled our footsteps. The penthouse suite occupied the entire floor, its double doors imposing and solid. The compliance team leader knocked firmly. Vartan Corp audit team, please open the door. Silence. She knocked again, louder this time. Mr. Vartan, this is official company business. We need immediate access. From inside, I could hear muffled voices, the sound of rapid movement, drawers opening and closing, the scramble of people who'd been caught completely off guard. "Hotel security," Bradley called out. "We're conducting a routine audit. Please cooperate." The door finally opened, revealing Anton Vartan in a hotel bathrobe, his hair disheveled and his face flushed with the kind of panic that came from having your carefully constructed lies collapse in real time. Behind him, I could see Maren frantically gathering clothes from the floor. "This is highly irregular," Anton blustered, trying to block the doorway. "I'm not dressed for a business meeting." "Neither is my wife, apparently," I said, pushing past him into the suite. The penthouse was everything you'd expect from a $2,000 a night hotel room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, a living area larger than most people's apartments, and a bedroom where my wife was currently struggling into the dress I'd seen her wear to work that morning. "Jace!" Maren's voice carried a note of panic she couldn't quite suppress. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife," I said calmly. "The one who told me she was at a business conference?" The compliance team had spread out through the suite like a forensics unit, photographing everything, documenting the champagne bottles, the room service receipts, the Vartan Corp credit card sitting on the nightstand next to a pair of women's earrings I'd given Maren for our anniversary. "Mr. Vartan," the team leader said, "we need to discuss these expense reports, specifically the charges to company accounts for personal entertainment." "This is a legitimate business meeting," Anton replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "With your wife present?" Elara asked, stepping into view. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Anton's face went pale. "Elara, I didn't expect—" "Clearly." Her voice could have cut glass. Just as Mr. Arnell didn't expect to find his wife in a hotel room with her boss, charging champagne and room service to the marketing budget. Maren had finally managed to get dressed, but her appearance told the story her words couldn't deny. Smudged lipstick, disheveled hair, the kind of flush that came from activities that definitely weren't listed in any corporate handbook. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, the classic defense of the caught cheater. "Really?" I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app. "Because it looks like you've been here for 3 hours in a penthouse suite with a man who isn't your husband while claiming to be at a conference that doesn't exist." The compliance team leader looked up from her documentation. "Mr. Vartan, company policy is very clear about personal relationships between supervisors and subordinates, especially when company funds are involved." "There's no relationship," Anton said desperately. "This is a misunderstanding." Elara laughed, a sound like ice cracking. 17 photographs, dozens of text messages, and hotel receipts going back 6 months suggest otherwise. She handed a folder to the compliance team leader, who opened it and began reviewing the contents with the expression of someone finding exactly what they'd expected to find. "Mr. Vartan, Mrs. Arnell, you're both suspended pending a full investigation," the team leader announced. "All company access is revoked immediately." The room fell silent except for the sound of Maren's sharp breathing and the scratch of pens on paper as the investigators continued their documentation. "Jace," Maren said, her voice smaller now, "we need to talk." "No," I replied. "We really don't. We needed to talk 6 months ago before you brought him into our house. We needed to talk before you started lying about conferences and charging your affair to his expense account. We needed to talk before you took photographs in our bedroom and sent them to your lover like trophies." Her face crumpled as she realized how much I knew, how completely her deception had been exposed. "I want you out of the house by tonight," I continued. "Your things will be packed and waiting on the front porch." "You can't do that," she protested. "Actually, I can. The house is in my name. The mortgage is my responsibility. And as of today, you're no longer welcome there." Anton tried to step forward, some misguided attempt at chivalry. "Now see here." "No, you see here," I said, turning on him with 6 months of suppressed anger finally finding its target. "You pursued a married woman, brought her to hotels on your company's dime, and helped her lie to her husband for half a year. The only reason I'm not knocking you through that window is because I don't want to give you any grounds to claim harassment." The compliance team was packing up their evidence, their work complete. Hotel security stood by, waiting for the all-clear to escort everyone from the premises. Elara watched it all with the satisfaction of someone seeing a plan executed flawlessly. "Mr. Vartan, Mrs. Arnell," the team leader said, "you'll be hearing from corporate counsel within 48 hours. I strongly suggest you both retain legal representation." As they filed out, I found myself alone with Maren for the first time since discovering her betrayal. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the exposure of her lies. "I never meant for it to happen this way," she said quietly. "But you meant for it to happen," I replied. "That's the difference between an accident and a choice. You chose this, Maren. Every lie, every hotel room, every time you looked me in the eye and told me you were going to a conference. You chose all of it. I walked to the window, looking out over the harbor where boats moved back and forth in patterns that made sense, following rules that everyone understood, unlike marriages, apparently. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you figure out how to rebuild your life without me in it," I said, turning back to face her. "And I figure out how to rebuild mine without you." The elevator doors closed between us with a soft chime, carrying me down toward a lobby full of curious guests and a future that suddenly felt full of possibilities instead of disappointments. The house felt different when I returned from the hotel. Larger somehow, as if removing Maren's lies had created extra space in every room. I moved through our home with the methodical efficiency of a man dismantling a life, packing her belongings into boxes and suitcases with the same precision she'd once used to pack for her fictional conferences. Her clothes went into garbage bags. Her jewelry, her books, her collection of motivational business biographies that she'd never actually read, everything that marked her presence in what had been our shared space. I found myself cataloging the artifacts of deception, the credit card statements she'd hidden, the phone charger for a second device I'd never seen, the business cards from restaurants where she'd supposedly entertained clients but had actually been entertaining her lover. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the afternoon. Missed calls from Maren, text messages that grew increasingly desperate as the reality of her situation sank in. I deleted them without reading most of them. Whatever she had to say now was 6 months too late. At 4:30, my best friend Kellen arrived with his pickup truck and the kind of grim determination that came from years of friendship and military service. He took one look at the boxes stacked by the front door and nodded. "How bad?" he asked. "Hotel room? Her boss? Company credit card?" Kellen whistled low. She always did think she was smarter than everyone else. We loaded the truck in silence, two men who'd known each other long enough that conversation wasn't necessary. Kellen had been my best man at the wedding, had warned me even then that Maren's ambition might eventually outweigh her loyalty. I'd ignored him, convinced that love could overcome any obstacle. "Where do you want this stuff?" he asked as we secured the last of the boxes. "Storage unit downtown. I'll text her the address and the access code." "That's generous of you." "It's practical. I want her gone, not homeless. There's a difference." My phone rang as we were climbing into the truck. Elara Vartan's name appeared on the screen. "How are you holding up?" she asked without preamble. "Better than expected. You?" "Satisfied. Anton's been terminated, effective immediately. The board met in emergency session an hour ago." I felt a grim satisfaction at the news. "And Maren?" "Also terminated. HR is reviewing all her expense reports and project assignments. It appears your wife was quite creative with company resources." Kellen raised an eyebrow at my side of the conversation, but I waved him off. Some explanations could wait. "What about the legal side?" I asked Elara. "I've filed for divorce. My attorney suggests you do the same immediately. The evidence we've gathered will make it straightforward." "Already scheduled. Meeting with my lawyer tomorrow morning." "Good. Oh, and Jace? There's something else you should know. The local business journal is running a story tomorrow about the Vartan Corp investigation. Your wife's name will be mentioned." I closed my eyes, imagining Maren's horror at seeing her professional humiliation made public. 6 months ago, the thought would have bothered me. Now it felt like justice. "Thank you for the warning." "It's not a warning. It's a gift." After we'd deposited Maren's belongings in the storage unit, Kellen and I found ourselves at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar that served decent beer and minded its own business. The afternoon crowd was thin, a few construction workers, some retirees, and 2 men trying to make sense of how a marriage could collapse so completely in a single day. "So what's the plan?" Kellen asked, working on his second beer. "Divorce, sell the house, start over somewhere else." "That's not a plan. That's a retreat." I studied my friend's face, noting the concern behind his casual tone. Kellen had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to work construction and worry about his friend's poor life choices. He'd earned the right to speak his mind. "What would you suggest?" "Fight back. She humiliated you, lied to you, cheated on you in your own house. Don't just walk away. Make sure she understands there are consequences. She lost her job, her marriage, her reputation. How much more consequence do you want?" Kellen's smile held no warmth. "I want her to remember this for the rest of her life. I want her to think twice before she treats the next guy like garbage." My phone buzzed with another text from Maren. This time I read it. "Please call me. We can work this out. I made a mistake." A mistake. like forgetting to pick up milk at the grocery store or missing an anniversary dinner, not like conducting a 6-month affair and lying about it every single day. She's still trying to minimize it, I said, showing Kellen the message. Of course she is. That's what cheaters do. They minimize, they rationalize, they make it your fault for not understanding their needs. He was right, of course. Even now, even after being caught in the most humiliating circumstances possible, Maren was trying to control the narrative, trying to reduce 6 months of systematic betrayal to a simple mistake that could be forgiven and forgotten. The Vartan woman, Kellen said. She seems to have her head on straight. Elara. Yeah, she's formidable. You could do worse for an ally. I thought about that as we finished our beers and prepared to face whatever came next. Elara Vartan had orchestrated the destruction of 2 careers and 2 marriages with surgical precision. She'd turned corporate compliance procedures into weapons of personal revenge. She'd reduced my cheating wife and her arrogant lover to unemployed, soon-to-be-divorced cautionary tales. And she'd done it all without breaking a single law or crossing any ethical lines that couldn't be justified by the evidence. Yeah, I agreed. I could do worse. The drive home took me past the Palisade Grand, where a few news vans had gathered in the parking lot. Word was spreading about the Vartancorp investigation, the kind of corporate scandal that local media loved to cover. I could imagine the headlines: CEO terminated for expense account violations, affair leads to corporate shakeup, local business leaders face ethics investigation. Maren's worst nightmare was becoming reality. Her carefully constructed professional image, the network of contacts she'd cultivated, the reputation she'd built, all of it crumbling because she couldn't keep her hands off her married boss. My house was dark when I arrived, the silence almost oppressive after months of tension and lies. But it was a clean silence, honest in its emptiness. No more wondering where Maren really was when she claimed to be working late. No more analyzing her expressions for signs of deception. No more living with someone who saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my office, surrounded by blueprints and engineering specifications that made sense in ways that human relationships apparently didn't. Structures followed rules, materials had predictable properties, loads and stresses could be calculated, planned for, accommodated. People, it turned out, were far less reliable. My phone rang at 9:30. Maren's number again. This time I answered. "Jace, thank God," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I've been busy, packing your things, changing the locks, consulting with a divorce attorney. You know, the usual activities of a man whose wife has been lying to him for 6 months. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I have photographs, Maren. I have credit card receipts. I have text messages. I know about every hotel room, every restaurant, every lie you told me about working late or attending conferences." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of 6 months of deception finally acknowledged. "I never meant to hurt you," she said finally. "But you did hurt me. Every day, every lie, every time you came home from being with him and pretended to be my loving wife, you hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. No, we can't. You made your choice, Maren. You chose him over me, lies over truth, your career over our marriage. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. I lost my job. Isn't that enough?" The question revealed everything I needed to know about who Maren really was. Not remorse for betraying our marriage, not guilt for the pain she'd caused, but frustration that her actions had professional consequences. "No," I said quietly. "It's not nearly enough." I hung up and turned off the phone, cutting the last connection between my old life and whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork, reporters and gossip, the messy business of untangling a life built on foundations that had never been as solid as I'd believed. But tonight, for the first time in months, I could sit in my own house without wondering where my wife really was or what lies she was telling. The silence was honest, the solitude clean. It was a beginning. The next morning brought rain and reporters. I discovered both when I opened my front door to retrieve the newspaper and found a woman with a microphone standing on my porch, flanked by a cameraman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Arnell?" she said with the practiced enthusiasm of local television news. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 8. Would you care to comment on yesterday's Vartancorp investigation?" "No comment," I said, stepping back toward the door. "Sources suggest your wife was involved in the expense account irregularities that led to CEO Anton Vartan's termination. How does it feel to discover your spouse was having an affair with her boss?" I paused, my hand on the doorframe. 6 months ago, I would have retreated, embarrassed by the public attention, humiliated by having my personal life dissected on the morning news. But 6 months ago, I'd been married to a woman who respected me enough not to cheat on me in our own bedroom. It feels like justice, I said, looking directly into the camera. When people lie, cheat, and steal, there should be consequences. Yesterday there were. I closed the door on her follow-up questions and watched through the window as she recorded her segment, no doubt painting me as either a victim or a vindictive ex-husband, depending on what narrative played better with the morning audience. My phone had 17 missed calls, most from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, probably, or maybe Maren's friends looking for gossip. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them and headed to my appointment with the divorce attorney. David Chen's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that had seen better decades, but his reputation was solid and his approach refreshingly direct. He reviewed the evidence I'd brought, photographs, financial records, documentation of Maren's lies, with the dispassionate efficiency of a surgeon examining x-rays. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "Your wife's attorney will have very little room to maneuver. What about the house? Yours, purchased before the marriage, mortgage in your name alone. She has no claim. Alimony? Unlikely, given the circumstances. Adultery isn't grounds for divorce in Maine, but it certainly affects spousal support calculations, especially when the adultery involved defrauding her employer." I felt something loosen in my chest, tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "How long will this take?" "With evidence this clear? 6 months, maybe less if she doesn't contest it." As I left Chen's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Elara Vartan. "Coffee? We should discuss next steps." I found her at a small cafe near the waterfront, seated at a corner table that offered privacy and a clear view of anyone approaching. She'd traded yesterday's corporate armor for jeans and a cashmere sweater, but the intelligence in her eyes remained sharp as ever. "How did your attorney meeting go?" she asked as I sat down. "Better than expected. Yours?" "Anton's trying to claim the affair never happened, that the photographs were doctored, that the whole thing is some kind of elaborate setup." Her smile could have powered the city grid. "His attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the table." "What about the financial side?" "That's where it gets interesting. The forensic accountants found irregularities going back 18 months. Hotel rooms, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, all charged to various Vartan Corp accounts, all coinciding with your wife's travel schedule." I stirred sugar into my coffee, processing the implications. 18 months. She was planning this long before I suspected anything. Or she was involved with Anton longer than either of us realized. The early charges were smaller, more carefully hidden. The recent ones got sloppy, arrogant. Success made them careless. Success made them stupid. They started believing their own lies, thinking they were too smart to get caught. A group of businessmen at the next table were discussing the Vartan Corp story, their voices carrying just enough for us to catch fragments. Terminated for cause, expense account fraud, but wife of some engineer. Elara noticed my expression. "Having second thoughts about the publicity?" "No, just adjusting to being part of someone else's gossip." "You could have stayed quiet, handled this privately. Why didn't you?" I thought about that, watching rain streak the cafe windows. Because private consequences weren't enough. She didn't just betray me. She betrayed everyone who trusted her, everyone who believed her lies. The people she worked with, the clients she claimed to be serving while she was actually in hotel rooms with her boss. They deserved to know who they were really dealing with. And Anton? Anton got what he earned. You don't pursue married employees, charge affairs to company accounts, and expect to keep your job. Elara nodded approvingly. I've been thinking about that, about what they earned versus what they've received. Meaning? Meaning they lost their jobs and their marriages. But they're both intelligent, educated people with professional networks. They'll recover, find new positions, rebuild their reputations. In 5 years, this will be an embarrassing story they tell at cocktail parties. I didn't like the direction this conversation was heading. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting the temporary consequences aren't enough for people who caused permanent damage. Elara, they're finished professionally. No one in this city will hire them after this scandal. This city, yes, but there are other cities, other companies, other opportunities for ambitious people who've learned to be more careful about getting caught. She was right, of course. Maren was smart, charming, and experienced. Once the immediate scandal faded, she'd find ways to spin the story, to present herself as a victim of circumstances rather than an architect of deception. She'd get letters of recommendation from clients who hadn't heard about the affair, use her network to find opportunities in other markets. What did you have in mind? I asked, already knowing I shouldn't. A more permanent reminder of the importance of honesty in professional relationships. Before I could respond, my phone rang, Kellen's name on the screen. "Jace, you need to get down here," he said without preamble. "Where's here?" "The storage unit. Your wife's here with a truck and two guys I don't recognize. They're loading up her stuff, but they're also asking a lot of questions about you." I felt ice water replace the coffee in my stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Where you work, what kind of money you make, whether you own any other property. The kind of questions that make me think she's planning something." I looked at Elara, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation with growing interest. "We'll be right there," I said. "We?" Kellen asked. "Long story. Just keep an eye on them until I arrive." Elara was already standing, pulling on her coat with the efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. "It seems your wife isn't ready to accept defeat gracefully." "Apparently not." "Good," she said, her smile returning. "I was hoping she'd try to fight back. It makes the next phase so much more satisfying." The drive to the storage facility took 15 minutes through downtown traffic that seemed determined to slow our progress. Elara spent the time making phone calls, her voice crisp and professional as she spoke to people I couldn't identify about matters I couldn't quite follow. "Insurance adjusters," she explained after the third call. "Private investigators. A few journalists who specialize in corporate fraud cases." "Why?" "Because your wife is about to make a very serious mistake, and I want to make sure it's properly documented." We found Kellen leaning against his truck in the storage facility parking lot, his arms crossed and his expression grim. Two men in work clothes were loading boxes into a rental truck while Maren supervised, her voice carrying across the lot as she directed their efforts. "She's been here an hour," Kellen reported. "Asked the facility manager about your other units, wanted to know if you had access to hers." "I don't have other units." "I know that, but she doesn't seem to believe it." As we watched, Maren approached the facility manager again, gesturing animatedly. Even from a distance, her body language suggested frustration and growing desperation. "She's looking for assets," Elara observed, "probably hoping to find something she can claim in the divorce." "There's nothing to find." "She doesn't know that. Desperate people make assumptions, and assumptions lead to mistakes." Maren spotted us across the parking lot and started walking in our direction, her expression shifting from frustration to anger to something that might have been calculation. She'd always been good at reading situations, adapting her approach to get what she wanted. "Jace," she said as she approached, "we need to talk." "No, we don't." "Yes, we do. About the house, about our finances, about how we're going to handle this situation like adults." "The situation is handled. You're getting divorced, you're unemployed, you're no longer my problem." Her composure cracked slightly. "I have rights. I contributed to that marriage, to our life together. You contributed lies and betrayal. That's not worth much in divorce court. I contributed 7 years of my life, my career, Your career?" Kellen interrupted. "The one you just lost for having an affair with your boss?" Maren's attention shifted to him, her eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when my best friend gets cheated on by someone he trusted. It concerns me when that someone shows up asking questions about his assets like she's planning to take him for everything he's worth." "I'm not trying to take anything that isn't rightfully mine." Elara stepped forward, her presence immediately changing the dynamics of the confrontation. "Mrs. Arnell, or should I say, former Mrs. Arnell." "You," Maren said, recognition and hatred warring in her voice. "You set this up. You orchestrated the whole thing." "I documented your husband's affair with my husband. I provided evidence of expense account fraud to the appropriate corporate authorities. I did nothing illegal or unethical." "You destroyed 2 careers, 2 marriages?" "Your affair destroyed 2 marriages. Your expense account fraud destroyed 2 careers. I simply made sure there were consequences for your choices." The parking lot fell silent, except for the sound of boxes being loaded into the rental truck. Maren looked between the three of us, perhaps finally understanding that she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over since the moment you brought Anton Vartan into our bedroom. Everything since then has just been paperwork." She turned and walked back to the truck, her shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. Within minutes, she and her hired help had finished loading and driven away, leaving the 4 of us standing in a parking lot that suddenly felt much larger. "That went better than expected," Elara said. "Better how?" "She threatened you, in front of witnesses, after being caught committing adultery and expense account fraud. Her divorce attorney is going to have nightmares." Kellen was studying Elara with the kind of attention he usually reserved for structural problems. "You're enjoying this." "Shouldn't I be?" My husband cheated on me with a married employee, charged their affair to company accounts, and humiliated me in front of our entire social circle. Now they're both unemployed, soon to be divorced, and facing potential criminal charges for fraud. Criminal charges? I asked. The district attorney's office is reviewing the Vartancorp case. 18 months of fraudulent expense reports could constitute embezzlement, depending on the total amount involved. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $60,000. Possibly more, once the forensic accountants finish their analysis. $60,000. Enough to turn expense account irregularities into felony charges. Enough to put Maren and Anton in prison, rather than just in unemployment lines. That's not what I wanted, I said. What you wanted was honesty from your wife. What you got was 6 months of lies and betrayal. Sometimes the consequences of people's choices exceed what we think they deserve. She was right, of course. But standing in that parking lot, watching the rental truck disappear around a corner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd started something that might be harder to stop than it had been to begin. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait, Elara replied, and we see just how far your wife is willing to go to avoid taking responsibility for her choices. The answer, as it turned out, was farther than any of us had imagined. 3 days later, I was served with a restraining order. The deputy sheriff who delivered it looked embarrassed, the kind of professional discomfort that came from serving papers on someone who clearly wasn't a threat to anyone. He handed me the documents with an apologetic shrug and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway reading accusations that bore no resemblance to reality. According to Maren's sworn statement, I had threatened her physical safety, engaged in stalking behavior, and demonstrated escalating patterns of domestic violence. She claimed to fear for her life and requested immediate protection from the court. Every word was a lie, but lies backed by official paperwork carried weight that truth sometimes lacked. I called David Chen immediately. It's a common tactic, he explained after reviewing the restraining order. When someone's facing a difficult divorce, they sometimes try to establish a pattern of victimization. It can affect property division, spousal support, even criminal charges if they can make it stick. But it's all fabricated. Of course it is. The question is whether we can prove that before it damages your case. What kind of damage? Restraining orders create public records. They suggest domestic violence even when none occurred. Future employers, landlords, anyone who runs a background check will see it. I sat in Chen's office, watching rain streak the windows, and felt the ground shifting beneath my feet again. Just when I'd thought the situation was stabilizing, Maren had found a new way to attack. How do we fight this? We document everything. Your whereabouts during the time she claims you threatened her, witnesses who can testify to your character, evidence that contradicts her version of events. I have evidence. The tracking app, the photographs from the hotel, proof that she's been lying for months. That proves she committed adultery, not that you didn't threaten her. We need to focus on disproving her specific claims. I spent the rest of the day gathering documentation, work schedules, credit card receipts, security footage from my office building that proved I'd been nowhere near Maren during the alleged incidents. It was exhausting, methodical work that felt like trying to prove a negative. My phone rang as I was reviewing my calendar for the third time. Elara's name on the screen. I heard about the restraining order, she said without preamble. News travels fast. Maren's attorney filed it as an emergency motion. Very dramatic, very public. The local legal community is talking. Saying what? That either you're a dangerous man who fooled everyone for years, or your wife is desperate enough to perjure herself in court. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Which way is opinion leaning? Toward the latter. Maren's reputation took a significant hit after the Vartancorp scandal. People remember that she lied to her husband, her employer, and her colleagues for months. It's not a big leap to assume she might lie to a judge. But assumptions don't win court cases. No, they don't. That's why I'm calling. I may have something that helps. An hour later, we met at the same waterfront cafe, but this time Elara carried a laptop bag instead of just her purse. She set up the computer with practiced efficiency and turned the screen toward me. Anton's been busy since his termination, she said, clicking through a series of screenshots. Text messages, emails, social media posts, all of it focused on revenge against the people he blames for his downfall. The messages were ugly, filled with threats and accusations that painted both Elara and me as conspirators in some elaborate scheme to destroy innocent people. But more importantly, they showed Anton and Maren coordinating their response, planning their counterattack. This one, Elara said, highlighting a particular exchange, from yesterday morning, 2 hours before the restraining order was filed. The message was from Maren. Legal strategy meeting at 10 a.m. Bring documentation of Jay's threatening behavior. Remember, specific dates, specific incidents, specific threats. Anton's response. Already drafted. 3 incidents, escalating severity. Witnesses lined up. I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my chest. They're manufacturing evidence. They're committing perjury and conspiracy, and probably several other felonies I haven't thought of yet. How did you get these? Anton left his laptop logged into our shared cloud account. Technically, I have legal access to anything stored there until our divorce is finalized. Will this hold up in court? It should. The messages are authenticated by metadata, and the conspiracy is clearly documented. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. Maren hadn't just lied about conferences and expense accounts. She'd graduated to lying under oath, manufacturing evidence, and attempting to have me arrested on false charges. There's more, Elara continued, clicking to another screen. Financial records from Anton's personal accounts. He's been paying for Maren's legal fees, her temporary housing, even her car payments. Why would he do that? Because they're still together. The affair didn't end when they lost their jobs. It just went underground. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank transfers, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, all showing that Anton and Maren were continuing their relationship while simultaneously claiming in legal documents that it had been a brief mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. This destroys both their divorce cases, I said. It destroys more than that. Perjury in divorce proceedings is a felony. Conspiracy to file false police reports is a felony. And if they've been coordinating their testimony, witness tampering, among other charges. I studied the evidence on the screen, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Maren had escalated the conflict, forced us to dig deeper, and in doing so had exposed herself to criminal prosecution rather than just professional embarrassment. What do you want to do with this? I asked. I want to end this, permanently. Meaning? Meaning I want them both to understand that there are consequences for lying under oath, for filing false police reports, for attempting to destroy innocent people with fabricated evidence. Her voice carried a note of finality that made me think of doors closing, bridges burning, points of no return being crossed. Criminal charges, I said. Criminal charges. That seems like escalation. They escalated when they decided to commit perjury. We're just responding appropriately. I thought about that as we sat in the cafe, watching afternoon traffic move past the windows. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a man with a cheating wife and a failing marriage. Now I was potentially a key witness in a criminal case that could send 2 people to prison. There's something else you should know, Elara said, closing the laptop. The district attorney's office called this morning, and they want to interview both of us about the Vartancorp case. Interview us about what? About whether we have any evidence of ongoing criminal activity related to the expense account fraud. I felt the pieces clicking into place. The messages, the financial coordination, the perjury. All of it. They're building a case that goes far beyond simple adultery or even expense account irregularities. How far beyond? Conspiracy, fraud, perjury, witness tampering. We're talking about serious prison time if they are convicted. I stared out at the harbor, watching boats navigate channels that had been marked and mapped for centuries. Safe passage required following established rules, respecting known hazards, understanding that some waters were too dangerous to navigate. Maren and Anton had sailed into dangerous waters the moment they decided to lie under oath. When do we meet with the district attorney? I asked. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. And after that? After that, it's out of our hands. The system takes over, and Maren and Anton get to discover what happens when you lie to judges and prosecutors instead of just spouses and employers. I thought about the restraining order in my briefcase, the false accusations that could have destroyed my reputation and my freedom if we hadn't uncovered the conspiracy behind them. They brought this on themselves, I said. Yes, they did. But it still feels like we're destroying their lives. No, Elara said firmly. We're documenting the ways they've chosen to destroy their own lives. There's a difference. She was right, of course. But as we prepared to leave the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to cross a line that would change all of us, permanently and irrevocably. The question was whether that change would be justice or simply revenge dressed in legal clothing. Tomorrow, we'd find out. The Cumberland County District Attorney's Office occupied a brick building that had seen decades of Portland's legal dramas unfold within its walls. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Mitchell met us in a conference room lined with law books and case files, her expression professional but interested as she reviewed the evidence Elara had compiled. This is comprehensive, she said, scrolling through the documented messages between Maren and Anton. Conspiracy to commit perjury, witness tampering, ongoing fraud. We have enough here for multiple felony charges. What's the timeline? Elara asked. Grand jury convenes next week. If they return indictments, arrests follow within days. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Arrests. Mr. Arnell, your wife and her lover conspired to have you falsely arrested on domestic violence charges. They manufactured evidence, suborned perjury, and attempted to manipulate the legal system for personal gain. These aren't civil matters anymore. They're serious crimes. Mitchell was right, of course. The restraining order hadn't been a desperate mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It had been a calculated attack designed to destroy my reputation and give Maren advantages in our divorce proceedings. What happens to the restraining order? I asked. Dismissed immediately. Judge Harrison is not pleased about being lied to in her courtroom. And the divorce proceedings? Your wife's credibility is destroyed. Her attorney will likely withdraw from the case rather than risk sanctions for presenting fraudulent evidence. We spent 2 hours going through the evidence, providing statements and signing documents that would set in motion a legal process I'd never imagined being part of. By the time we left the DA's office, Maren and Anton's fate was sealed. How do you feel? Elara asked as we walked to our cars. Like I've been through a war. You have been? And you won. Did I? Or did we just become the kind of people who destroy others for revenge? Elara stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious. Jace, your wife committed adultery, lied to you for months, defrauded her employer, and then tried to have you arrested on false charges. At what point do consequences become justified? I know, it's just that you're a decent person who doesn't enjoy watching others suffer, even when they have earned that suffering through their own choices. She was right. Despite everything Maren had done, despite the lies and betrayal and false accusations, I took no pleasure in imagining her being arrested, processed, and potentially imprisoned. That's what makes you different from them, Elara continued. They destroyed people without remorse. You're trying to save someone who spent months trying to destroy you. My phone buzzed with a text from Kellen. Turn on Channel 8, now. We found a sports bar with multiple televisions and asked the bartender to switch one to the local news. Jennifer Walsh, the same reporter who'd ambushed me on my front porch, was standing outside the Vartancorp headquarters with breaking news. Federal investigators have joined the local probe into expense account irregularities at Vartancorp, sources tell Channel 8. The investigation now includes potential mail fraud and wire fraud charges related to what prosecutors describe as a systematic scheme to defraud the company of more than $100,000. $100,000? The forensic accountants had found more than anyone expected. Former CEO Anton Vartan and former marketing director Maren Arnell are expected to face federal charges, in addition to local prosecution for perjury and conspiracy. Federal charges. Prison time measured in years, not months. Jesus, I said quietly. The news report continued with file footage of the hotel raid, interviews with Vartancorp board members expressing shock and disappointment, and commentary from legal experts about the severity of federal fraud charges. They did this to themselves, Elara said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. I know, but federal prison is where people go when they steal $100,000 from their employer and then lie under oath to cover it up. The bartender, who'd been listening to our conversation, looked over with interest. You folks involved in that Vartancorp thing? Peripherally, I said. My buddy works construction at their headquarters. Says the FBI was there all morning, carrying out boxes of documents. Real CSI stuff. I finished my beer and stood to leave. The walls of the bar suddenly felt too close, the weight of what we'd set in motion too heavy to bear in such a confined space. I need some air, I told Elara. We walked along the waterfront in silence, past tourists and joggers and people whose biggest problems were probably deciding where to eat dinner. The normalcy of their concerns felt alien after weeks of living inside a legal thriller. Regrets? Elara asked as we stopped at a bench overlooking the harbor. About Maren? No. About how far this went? Maybe. They had multiple opportunities to stop. They could have ended the affair, come clean about the expenses, accepted the professional consequences, and moved on with their lives. Instead, they doubled down. They tripled down. The affair, the fraud, the perjury, each step made the next one inevitable. A seagull landed near our bench, studying us with the calculating gaze of a creature that understood opportunity and risk. I envied its simplicity: find food, avoid predators, survive another day. No moral complexity, no unintended consequences, no wondering whether justice and revenge were really different things. What happens to us now? I asked. We testify when called. We finalize our divorces. We move on with our lives. Together? The question surprised both of us. We'd been allies in a campaign of mutual revenge, partners in documenting and exposing our spouse's betrayal. But we'd never discussed what relationship, if any, we might have after the legal proceedings ended. I don't know, Elara said honestly. We've seen each other at our worst, angry, vindictive, determined to destroy people we once loved. That's not the foundation most relationships are built on. But we've also seen each other fight for what's right, refuse to be victims, demand accountability from people who thought they were untouchable. True. We sat in comfortable silence, watching boats navigate the harbor channels. The afternoon was fading toward evening, painting the water in shades of gold and amber that made the city look more beautiful than it had any right to be. Whatever happens, I said finally, I'm grateful. You could have handled Anton's betrayal privately, quietly. Instead, you helped me discover the truth about my marriage and gave me the tools to fight back. You could have accepted Maren's lies, looked the other way, pretended everything was fine. Instead, you chose to demand honesty and accountability, even when it led to federal charges and prison time. Especially then. People like Anton and Maren count on others being too polite, too forgiving, too afraid of consequences to hold them accountable. They exploit decency and call it weakness. My phone rang, David Chen's name on the screen. The restraining order has been dismissed, he reported. Judge Harrison wants to see both attorneys in chambers tomorrow to discuss potential sanctions against opposing counsel. Sanctions? For presenting evidence they knew or should have known was fabricated. It's a serious matter. What about the divorce? Maren's attorney withdrew this afternoon. She'll need new representation, which will delay proceedings, but the outcome isn't in doubt. You'll get everything you asked for and probably more. I thanked him and hung up, feeling simultaneously vindicated and hollow. The legal system was working exactly as it should. Lies were being exposed, crimes were being prosecuted, justice was being served. But justice felt different than I'd expected, more complex and less satisfying. Good news? Elara asked. The best possible news, legally speaking. But I keep thinking about the person Maren used to be, or the person I thought she was. 7 years of marriage, and I never saw this coming. Maybe because it wasn't there to see. Maybe the pressure of ambition, the temptation of power, the thrill of deception changed her into someone neither of us would recognize. Or maybe I just never knew who she really was. Does it matter now? I considered that as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. Did it matter whether Maren had always been capable of such systematic deception, or whether circumstances had corrupted someone who'd once been honest? Did it matter whether Anton had seduced her, or she'd pursued him? Did it matter whether their crimes had been calculated from the beginning, or had escalated through a series of increasingly desperate choices? No, I said finally. It doesn't matter. What matters is what they chose to do, and what we chose to do in response. And what we choose to do next. What do you want to do next? Elara smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her since that morning she'd appeared on my doorstep with a folder full of evidence and a plan for revenge. I want to have dinner with a man who fought back when someone tried to destroy him, she said, and I want to see if there's anything between us besides shared anger and mutual respect. That sounds like a good place to start. We walked back toward downtown as the streetlights began to flicker on, two people who'd discovered that sometimes the end of one story was just the beginning of another. Behind us, the harbor reflected the city lights like scattered stars, beautiful and distant and full of possibilities that neither revenge nor justice could fully capture. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more testimony, more consequences for choices made in hotel rooms and corporate offices. But tonight, for the first time in months, I could imagine a future that wasn't defined by other people's lies or my own need for vindication. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a new beginning.